Just to make a quick announcement before we start, we plan on doing a photo with everyone here at the event out front in the main hall here in front of the big sign at 6 p.m. So, all right, without further ado, this is our Restaking 2.0 panel. Our moderator is Roy Liu, partner at Longhash Ventures, with panelists Nikhil, Raghuveera, co-founder and CEO of Aethos, and Amir, Forouzani, co-founder of Puffer Finance. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you guys for attending. Restaking seems to be a gravitational force pulling in all of crypto and especially Ethereum. And the industry is putting its money where its mouth is. Last time I checked, the TVL has surpassed $13 billion in restaking. Now, I think we're blessed today, guys, with an audience that are best in their field in and out of Web3. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, can we go through a quick round of intro? What is Puffer? What are LRTs? What is Aethos? And what are AVSs?
Of course. Yeah, so maybe I'll just give a quick overview of Puffer. You can think of Puffer as a platform that enables restaking for all. We have a permissionless validator set on the Ethereum level. These Ethereum validator set can natively restake their assets to secure future infrastructure and also provide better rewards for their users through these restaking infrastructure. And in short, we wanted to enable that for everyone. Right now, majority of the staking infrastructure is dominated by centralized or institutional operators. We wanted to further enable that for everyone at home. Stakers or solo stakers, or even institutions now are going to have much better capital efficiency at running these things. So that's very short what Puffer is, but maybe I can start talking about LRTs as well. But I think it would be great to maybe give an overview of restaking for everyone who didn't hear what restaking is even. I would like to maybe invite you guys to maybe think about SLAs. On Web2, we had service level agreements. They were backed by reputation. They were backed by certain promises on paper and contract. Now, we are moving to a trustless world on Web3, where we do not want to trust these paperworks. We do not want to trust reputation and boards behind a commit. We want to have economic security behind that. Proof of stake is an example of that. There is economic security that secures a commit, a promise, that we would like to keep the blockchain going. We would like to attest on this state. We would like to propose the next block and include transactions without censoring the user. You can imagine restaking and programmable slashing as an extension of that. Now we have these trustless SLAs, we have these trustless contracts that are backed by economic security. You're putting money behind a commit and a promise that you made. If you breach this promise, you're going to lose that money. You're going to get slashed. If you actually deliver this promise, you're going to get rewards for it. And in short, that's what restaking is. That's what programmable slashing is. Now, getting into LRTs, if you're familiar with LSTs and liquid staking, the purpose of them was to actually abstract away complexities of running POS. Some folks don't have 32 ETH to run a validator. For some folks who even have that 32 ETH, it might be too complex, too technically complex to run that validator. And at the same time, users want to take advantage of this very low risk reward, this organic yield that the blockchain of Ethereum generates. That's where LSTs came to the game. They were like, okay, we're going to abstract away all these hard levels of participation. You guys bring in any amount of ETH, we're going to pull it together, we're going to run some trusted validators and do it. Of course, we had to do it more trustless and permissionless, and that's where Puffer comes in and wanted to do it. Now, LRTs are very similar. There's a lot of technical barriers to be running these restaking applications or these infrastructures that are backed by restaking security, and therefore LRTs are going to abstract that away from the users. Users do not have to be confused to make decisions, which infrastructure am I going to secure, which infrastructure is best to deploy my assets. Rather, the LRT is going to abstract that away. It's going to use its risk management module to actually have the highest reward with the lowest risk for the users. And that's, in short, what an LRT is.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll start with one first, what Aethos is, and then what we are as an AVS or an actively validated service. So Aethos, we are a decentralized policy engine that lets an application, a project, an ecosystem set pre-transaction rules and logic for their smart contracts, for their solvers, for their sequencers, anything along the lines that involves some type of smart contract execution at the end of the day. So what does that really mean? Because that was quite abstract. Basically, the ability of incorporating any type of on-chain or off-chain information needed for a rule that you want that is executed before a transaction happens. So a super simple use case for this, or like an immediate use case that's quite relevant here, would be, let's take something like an exploit. So if you have an exploit that's happened on-chain, how can a project in an adjacent ecosystem say, hey, actually, we don't want these assets that are coming in from this exploit into our application? So you can actually have community-aligned liquidity. Another use case could be, you could be a gaming project, an on-chain game that wants to incorporate a lot of different information on-chain for transaction history, as well as some other off-chain information to say, hey, this person has done all these different things, so they can actually go and unlock this new item or enter this new world. So what we're trying to do is really abstract all of that away. Now, the thing here is, if we're doing that in a way that you want to have, like you're setting these rules, the real question then is, who is checking whether that rule is actually being adhered to or not? One way, of course, is that our labs company, you trust me to say, oh yeah, I'm checking if this rule is, in fact, has been applied or not. Probably not the best thing in the world for you if you're a developer, because you're now having this smart contract with a massive trust vulnerability in which you have to trust me. So instead, we look to having a network of operators that are economically secured. So in that case, if you have a network of operators who behave maliciously and say, we're going to say that this rule is passed, but in fact it isn't, they should have some type of economic stake. And you say, look, like you're acting maliciously, or you're making a mistake here. You should have some type of stake that is slashed if you make a mistake. And so that's where we use something like EigenLayer, where we have an actively validated service. And what we do here is we essentially borrow security. We borrow cryptoeconomic security from restakers to back our entire model. That's high level what we do. We can go into more details, but I won't dive into all the details just yet.
I feel like we're already 3 feet underwater. That was a very comprehensive overview. Thank you, guys. And I think it may come as a shock to a lot of the audience here, maybe even the industry as a whole, that this was such a big week for restaking, because EigenLayer just came on mainnet. And it feels like it was already on mainnet quite some time back, because we have been talking about it for a while, and folks had been pledging their ETH to LRTs extensively. So with that, what was released this week? And how did that uplift LRTs and AVSs?
Yeah, so like one of the advantages of Ethereum and its blessing is like its programmability, right? And that's where I believe EigenLayer is gonna really expand on it, right? That's why it was very big. That's why a lot of people are talking about it, because a lot of things that were not enabled to be done on Ethereum are now very much within reach. We'll get into what advantages it really adds, but what happened this week was essentially the upgrade from M1 contracts happened to the M2 contracts. M2 contracts essentially enable more delegated restaking, and it also enables the dual token restaking model, where the collateral that is protecting these promises, these AVSs, can be a combination of their native token and also the ETH that is backing them. At the same time, a big milestone was the first AVS, which is EigenDA, or EigenLayer's data availability service, went live with this upgrade. It really marked as a beginning of the restaking journey. The DA was the flagship. The DA was to set the example for other AVSs how it should be done and where the thing should be going. And it was provided, I would say, not only as a proof of concept by the EigenLayer team, but as a really enhancing factor in terms of increasing the throughput of the entire blockchain. We know that gas fees are a big pain point. Maintaining L2s that were created to reduce the gas fees are also a big pain point because you have to pay for a lot of transaction fees. With data availability, that was like inspired by proto-dang sharding and the recent EIP that went through, now we can get better data. Why wasn't these forms of data availability hard to make before was not only because of the Ethereum protocol itself, but it was also because of the trust model. Now EigenDA actually inherits its trust from the Ethereum L1, and also it is backed by economic security. Now we can have a reliable form of data availability service, and that's how it's gonna like feed back to it. And that's where all the excitements came about, like EigenLayer, that's went live. Maybe quick clarification of what didn't go live. And that includes slashing, attributable slashing, shared security slashing, payments. These are like some of the items that didn't go live. And of course, I do appreciate this, that not everything was turned on at like once, because we need to see how the whole ecosystem evolves. We need to see like how it is going to react, and we have to be flexible and dynamic on what it releases. So that's what happened in EigenLayer in the past week.
Yeah, let's stay on that notion just a little bit. We just went from 3 feet underwater to 6. So now we know that mainnet is live, but slashing is not. So we're, in my view, we're essentially in an environment of ZIRP, zero interest rate, right? And we're already seeing ORTs that are pledging TVL towards AVSs and big announcements. We're talking, 6, 7, 8 figure announcements about the pledges. And there seems to be like a simple mathematical expression of like what ultimately may make sense in terms of getting to the risk-adjusted return to gauge your pledges. But how do you think about this? How is Puffer kind of navigating this pledge to TVL ratio and deciding which AVSs to pledge to?
Absolutely. So this is very important at this phase of EigenLayer. Like a lot of the protocols, there are only a handful of AVSs out there, right? And of course, like we're comfortable with them because they've been talking about their AVSs a lot. There's been like a lot of conversations around it. We've looked at the protocol itself, and it's clear for a lot of protocols. So these pledges make sense at this moment, especially when there's no slashing live yet. But transparency is going to play a big role. Again, continuing to get to the point where slashing goes live, we have to know exactly what are the slashing rules. And we have to also know how much this AVS is going to generate in terms of yield, right? If you put $1 billion behind application or AVS X, that is going to like basically not even provide that 0.5% yield or 1% yield on the $1 billion, then it doesn't make sense for the user. Therefore, it's not really filling the gap on the risk adjustment. That's where at Puffer we're like working very closely with like a handful of like AVSs to actually figure these items out, figure out the landscape of these AVS rewards. So we have to decide to have an automated system of actually pointing the TVL that we have to different AVSs with risk adjustments. We're working with Gauntlet and Nethermine and actually come in with a subcommittee or sub-DAO of actually deciding these factors. It is very important that we, if we don't have to, not even opt into all of our TVL to a certain AVS. Why? Because we don't want to expose that TVL to slashing risk, right? That's where it's important that how the protocol is architected and what are the decisions that were made behind it before the slashing comes alive. And these are the things we've been probably designing for the past 8 months, along with the EigenLayer team. And very important factors to put into consideration as an LRT, because again, we are pointing certain users basically stake it at these protocols. So we have to be very careful and super conservative on how we're dealing with this.
I can add a little bit there as well.
Yes, absolutely. We'll come back to the automated risk scoring system. There's a lot to unpack there, but we'd love to hear from the perspective of AVS.
No, so I mean, like we've also been working together on this, right? So same when we have kind of these TVL kind of relationships of figuring out economic security, like we've also been working with Puffer. The other part that's worth adding here, in addition to everything Amir said, when we're thinking about economic security, from the AVS perspective, the other really big facet is how much economic security do you actually need, right? So, like on our end, we have with our, like, we haven't made the formal announcement, but we have something like $2.5 billion, up to $2.5 billion of commitment. That, of course, again, is like, how much of it do you need? Like, what's like, it's all shared security, so there's a lot to unpack there. But the really big question for us as an AVS is, at the end of the day, you're borrowing it from someone, which means that there's some type of overhead at some point in time. And right now, there's no payment capability, right? But when there is, you may not want $5 billion of economic security unless you're generating sufficient value that justifies that. Otherwise, you have your biggest cost overhead for your entire protocol is about to be your economic security. And so that's like one other facet is like from an AVS side, it's how do you think about one, like how much economic security do you need? And then two, when you start having these kind of slashing conditions as well, what is that risk-adjusted return and how much are you basically having to pay out?
Yeah, how does having Ethereum dual staked on the AVS impact the emission schedule? So what we have seen in other types of middleware is there tends to be a high inflation rate, anywhere between 7 to 20%, to encourage the bonding and holding of their native tokens. And as you navigate the role of Ethos as it fits into the restaking ecosystem, how do you anticipate the emission schedule to be different under the restaking model?
Yeah, it's one that we still, to be honest, we still have to figure out, and this is where we haven't, like, we're not launching our token just yet. We would start with just ETH as the asset for our economic security, and then over time we'll have the dual staking. I think ideally you have a model in which you would have, you have economic security in some way, shape, and form. When you do your TGE, you allocate some portion of that to your restakers and your operators, similar to how kind of like Wormhole did it with their early Guardian network, where they had 17 nodes, right, who were part of that Guardian network, and they allocated some initial launch for that. And then from there, I think we'll have to figure out how much of ETH do you want relative to your dual staking. So it doesn't have to be 50-50 either. You can actually have a variation of how much you might want. And so those are the things we'll have to figure out. And then based off of that, what's the emission schedule? But I think it's one that we'll still have to figure out, to be honest.
Okay, besides the emissions, let's spice this up even more. 2.5 billion is a huge number. That's a lot of parked capital to be responsible to yield for. And even more so, some of that money may not be a one-to-one ratio to the TVL from LRT side, right? We're seeing pledges more than literally the money that LRTs have because of the free cost of capital. So what this means to AVS is there are some externalities, right? If slashing happens on another AVS, it could potentially impact the amount of security on your AVS. How are we thinking about this?
So this is under a shared security. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this as well. Under a shared security model, yeah, you're basically going to have to figure out which other pools you're with. Like basically, it's like you as an AVS, which other AVSs are you with? I think this is where you start having this kind of question of risk-adjusted returns. What is the correlation of your risk-adjusted return relative to others? You don't want everything to be directly correlated. That's probably not the model you want to be in. There's probably going to be some balance of shared security as well as attributable security, which is separate, that's your own. And I think that's where you also you might want to think about the pricing of these differently as well. Okay, so where is your security originating from? The other thing that's worth considering too is what is the actual asset that is being used as your security? Not all restaking assets are the same either. And so you have to think about that as well, right? Is it natively staked ETH? Is it different LSTs that are being used? The pricing for all of those is going to vary. And so that's when we'll also probably look at a lot of the LRTs to kind of figure out some of that complexity.
Of course, like, I'm just gonna like expand a little bit on that. Slashing itself has a roadmap. So we're not gonna like, I know initially the idea, like if you looked at the M1 like slasher contracts were like all or nothing slashing. You do one bad thing and the entire pool is slashed. Of course, it's not gonna happen like that. The slashing is gonna have its own roadmap. It has its own structure. It has different parameters. There's one shared security, shared pool security, where people share slashable asset. They share, like if let's say anything, the entire pool can be slashed by just one AVS, but there can be other AVSs within the same pool. But we also have attributable slashing that is going to be added into the eigenlayer. What is attributable slashing? It means that each percentage of basically the pool is being allocated to certain AVS. Let's say 20% of it for AVS A, 30% of it for AVS B, and so on. So it means that the economic security of that shared pool cannot be slashed beyond that percentage for each AVS. That's where the other AVSs can feel comfortable about this. But yes, to your point, also each of these assets have different classes. There's going to be natively restaking. There's going to be LSD restaking. Also, there's going to be LRT restaking. Which LRT is providing that? Is the LRT has vendor locking? Does it have enough protections around its native restaking? The ETH that they staked on Ethereum, is it going to be slashed? So there's so many other factors that we can also unpack around the risks in the point of view of AVS versus the risk in the point of view of the LRT itself, right? There's so many sides into these risks, and also the risk to the ETH holders, the most important people, right? What are the risks that they're undertaking by locking their money either to an AVS directly through Eigenlayer marketplace or to an LRT? So these are some of the things that we definitely need to discuss.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more to discuss there as well. Let's come back to maybe 1 foot underwater for a second. I think there's an elegance to Eigenlayer, and that elegance is its benefits a multi-sided market. And to the side of the AVSs, traditionally, builders have to go through a lot of trouble to bootstrap their validator network. They have to secure their chain, and that's a tremendous amount of work. So, Nikhil, as you were deciding whether or not to be a restaked service, what factors came in to the decision to be one?
Yeah, so our general structure is we're a 3-sided marketplace for what we're doing at Aethos. We have, information providers such as different types of data providers. We're also internally building our own solutions as well, but outside any type of data providers. Then you have projects implementing us. So some of our different projects that will integrate Aethos for pre-transaction logic. Then you have the third side of that market is your economic security, your validators, essentially. So when we were building this out, our early light paper when we were exploring this idea last year was a proof of authority model. It was going to be a permission set of operators, very similar to Wormhole's Guardian network. That was the model we were going to use. We were like, this is the simplest way to create some type of mechanism in which you have a network of nodes rather than just relying on just us as a company. And the reason why was when we were doing our research, we found that a lot of our partners were like, we can't just have one person who is fully responsible for all of this. We need some type of trust minimized structure. So we started with that. And the reason why we started with a proof of authority model is because bootstrapping a token to create your economic security takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work, right? And so the alternative from a proof of authority model is probably something like a Cosmos SDK, where you're looking at kind of creating your own token and then creating your crypto economic security. So it was one of those two worlds. Eigenlayer was really interesting because we were looking at Eigenlayer for some time, in the beginning of last year and then onward, where here was a way of thinking about the fact that you can bootstrap your economic security with an asset that is related to ETH. I'm not going to say directly ETH because it sort of depends on what your underlying asset is, but something that is related to ETH in a way that you can say, hey, we can actually have a much better crypto economic security to start. And then over time, you have the ability of also launching your token, having a dual token for dual staking, and then you can think about how do you kind of think about that ratio. So there's a value of actually being able to bootstrap it from the start for crypto economic security.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've heard from some builders that are building AVSs that Eigenlayer is sort of like a magical faucet. You turn on a faucet and trust just comes out of it like water. Has it been like that? What would you say to fellow builders that are assessing the possibility of launching an AVS?
Yeah, I mean, for us, Eigenlayer has been, unfortunately, Nima couldn't make it, but Eigenlayer has been super supportive, right? It's great when you have an entire team that's thinking about economic security. You have an entire ecosystem of groups like Puffer across the LRT space. You have a lot of operators that are also looking to support Eigenlayer. And so in that case, if we were to do this from scratch without Eigenlayer, it was very easy for us to get, 10, 15, 20, 40, how many of our operators we need. It was very easy to get that. But otherwise, it actually becomes a much more difficult thing. I think a good example is we were talking to the Axelar co-founders. And I was like, how did you guys bootstrap your network in the beginning? Because they did a Cosmos SDK approach. And Yorgis, if you know him, super nice guy. He was like, yeah, I just went and, painted the vision to all these operators who then became validators for Axelar's network. But they had to spend a lot of time going and doing that. But in this case, Eigenlayer sort of created the ecosystem for all of that to happen. And then, of course, you have a lot of work on their end of thinking about the economic security. I think actually like having these like tiered approaches for launches is actually really helpful because it lets you kind of test things out. Even on our launch, the way we're thinking about it is we'll start with an alpha mainnet, then go to a private mainnet, and then eventually go to a mainnet. So we're also trying to sequence our launch accordingly. So that's where having Eigenlayer has been really helpful. And I would say the closest parallel I can draw to that is thinking of like a blockchain ecosystem, right? When you have a strong ecosystem in terms of like supporters, like you end up being able to like better navigate that ecosystem and work with the right partners you need.
Yeah, well, Nima's missing out for not being here. I think we're doing our
Maybe
lot by
I
filling
can
in.
fill in for Eigenlayer here. Yeah, so like Nikhil mentioned, Eigenlayer is about bootstrapping innovation. Like previously, if you had an idea, if you wanted to really convince people using this new infrastructure, you had to be started like going after big VCs. You had to create reputation. You had to create like certain token valuation that, hey, like I'm so incentivized to do something bad. So therefore, I want to be careful about this. Or users wouldn't trust that network. Like I mentioned at the beginning, now you have this trustless service level agreement. People can now just say, okay, this network X, Y, and Z, they might be very new, but they have this much economic security. In a case that malicious thing can happen, I can sort of get refunded. And those protocols are so not incentivized to do anything bad, right? So it makes it very like attractive in terms of like bootstrapping innovation. It also requires like less effort into creating valuation for your own token and making sure that it is actually performing really well before like even considering launching a protocol. That's where the whole meme around accelerating Ethereum or ETH accelerate, which everybody puts on their like crypto Twitter handles, came from there. Is because now people can deliver faster. They can deliver new things that were not possible before by simply just putting reputation behind a commit. Now we have money, the best form of it, which is ETH, behind a commit. And that's very important in like moving forward from this stage.
I want to ask you actually, because you are an investor and you've probably looked across the entire industry. Like, what do you find when you're, talking to different projects across the space? You've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about Eigenlayer. Like, where do you find the most value as you look at where Eigenlayer is today versus like what are the opportunities in the future?
So
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
no, this is fun. My hot take is ultimately every middleware will be an AVS. They just don't know it yet. And it's creating such a strong race to the top and strong race towards Ethereum alignment that there's a pressure perceived or not perceived amongst middleware builders. And if it's going to create camps of haves and have-nots. And if you're an AVS, then you have the Ethereum, which is the ultrasound money, the ultrasound security. And if you're not, then you're in the have-not camp, and there is a certain amount of pressure. Now, whether that pressure is good or bad, I'm not trying to pass a value judgment, but that is what I'm observing in the market, and I think that force is very real. With that said, from an investor's point of view, when we are evaluating potential opportunities of investment, we still look at the fundamentals, right? Does this team have something new to bring to the ecosystem? Do they have novel mechanisms that can make a better Oracle, a better layer 2, a better cross-chain interop protocol? So those fundamentals don't change. But at the consensus layer, at the security layer, the tidal wave is encapsulating all middleware builders. Yeah?
Yeah.
Solid. Nemo would be proud, I think.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm very much on board. Like, yeah, eventually, like, in short, economic security replaces reputation. It surpasses it by any measure. And all the infrastructure are eventually going to be replaced by that. Like every user is much rather use something that has money securing it rather than simply someone or a paper contract. And yeah, that's the.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a rite of passage for middleware builders, and we can even go even deeper to talk about how the recent EIPs within the Denkun upgrade is kind of paving a way from restaked AVSs towards enshrined AVSs, and I think within a couple of years that's going to happen. But to your point on using ETH as a money and ultrasound money, I think it has like implications to institutional holders as well, right? Because for a lot of large ETH holders, they're not really able or mandated to hold the long tail of tokens. So the ETH holders now have a way of getting additional yield on the ETH that they hold. And if there's one thing about this industry is we love yields. We turn over the ground to get yields. But where are the institutional players at? Like, are they actually able to restake these days? Is this a huge pool that could be unlocked?
Yeah, I think depends on institutions where. If we're like putting a measurement on the institutions within the US, I mean, traditionally they have moved slower because of a lot of barriers that they have naturally. Like even if you look at like normal staking, like they haven't been comfortable with it till recently. And I think we are actually observing a trend into actually this picking up. They're seeing the vision of like the entire infrastructure of money being protected by restaking and being able to have that low risk sort of fee extracted from it. You can think of restaking as just an expansion of POS, an expansion of like ETH normal staking. It now depends on your risk taste. Like if you want to actually be exposed to more risk for more rewards through restaking. Where they are, I think you're gonna be surprised if I told you there's a lot of bullish institutions that we talk to that are like really want to get into this industry. But of course, they are always gonna be later players. Why? Because they want to see like there is enough comfort. Of course, there's enough retail demand for it before they step up and actually like start doing this. But from the conversations that we had, there is like a big demand and interest. And at least like the way that you're explaining things, it just makes natural sense.
Do they even have access? Like, are the block demons and Coinbase institutionals out there supporting LRTs currently?
So this is in conversation. In terms of like custodial solutions being able to support it, yes. That is going to happen like sooner than you think in terms of providing support for it. But in terms of them sort of like directly step into it, that might be like a later stage. Already, if you think like Coinbase Cloud is going to operate an EigenDA, right? That means like how much comfort it is in terms of like stepping into this and how much knowledge around it is. Even Coinbase just published an article about what EigenLayer even is. This shows like the interest that the pressure that is like building from the institutional side to actually wanting to step in.
And Nikhil, this is a topic I would love to hear your thoughts on, because what you're building could be protecting institutional players from OFAC, right? And get to ARTs.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about. So another a big use case for us, for context, is actually preventing or the inflow of assets originating from sanctioned addresses. So we have a pretty big a set of compliance use cases that we're going live with. And so this is one thing I've been curious on from like an LRT standpoint is for institutions to come on board, and again, it depends on the type of institution we're talking about, right? But just take your more traditional institutions, either in the US, Europe, or even like Singapore, Japan. For them, it's going to be a question of like, what is the exposure, from an OFAC or a compliance standpoint, how are their assets potentially being commingled with others? And so this is one thing I've been really curious on, because if you're going to try to have institutional involvement in these types of pools, you have to either create completely separate pools, which is, I think, reasonable. But then on top of that, you have to also think about the rewards mechanism. And are all those rewards mechanisms going within a same pool and then going out? Are they being all separated? For an institution, it needs to be as separate as possible because you need to be able to say, hey, look, we have not participated in any part of this that is potentially involved with someone else who's a bad actor. And this is like from an LST standpoint, this is what Alluvial was basically doing, right? Is how do you create a fully institutional product? But the challenge here is, let's take an LRT. We can go through the flow. You start with a bunch of people all taking assets, ETH, putting it into a liquid restaking protocol. Now, are these all in separate pools, or are they all in the same place? If it's all in the same place, the institution can't participate, because then they're going to say, wait, if something happens in this pool, we can't touch those assets. So that's the first blocker. The second one is then they'll say, where are these rewards coming from? The third one is also that you now have this liquid restaking asset. So let's say there's like only 2 liquidity providers in that pool. Hypothetically, it's Fidelity and it is North Korea, 50-50. Maybe they're in separate pools, but your 2 LRT assets, the primary holders of that were originated from Fidelity and North Korea. It's unclear like what that means from a compliance standpoint, because Fidelity could say, hey, look, we never touched it. But they also know that like the other 50% of the supply came from North Korea. And so that's the other part that gets really interesting.
So we're talking about risk management, and besides the counterparty risk, and we spoke earlier also about portfolio risk, and there's of course the slashing risk. We're coming back to that, Amir. So I understand that Puffer is pioneering on anti-slashing technology. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and maybe even more generally, how should folks think about the different LRTs at their disposal?
Of course, yeah, the first thing is very important. Let's say, basically isolating hackers or bad players or sanctioned addresses has been a challenge for everyone. There are certain companies out there that we work with that are actually intensely working on this. For example, if let's say there was a phishing website and somebody got hacked, how are you going to stop them from getting incentives or getting basically isolate them in where they are. This is something we're working with companies already. There's more traditional TRMs and mistracks that are actually providing these services. But of course, like I mentioned, they're backed by reputation again. They're not backed by economic security that Aethos is working on. On the side of now, slashing is this very black swan existential thing. For Ethereum, for anything else. It means actually losing a big chunk of the asset itself. Our motivation as Puffer was how to make running Ethereum validators the most viable, as much viable as possible. And make it easy for everyone to run it in a trustless manner in a liquid staking pool or a liquid restaking pool. Because essentially each validator instance is gonna be entrusted with 32 ETH, and they're now have to operate on a level that is acceptable to the user as well. If they can get those 32 ETH and do nothing, then it is bad as well. Slashing was one of the factors that we had to solve for. We're now pooling ETH, we're allocating ETH to each of these validator instances, and they have to run it. Today, slashing happens because of mistakes, because the keys of each of those validators are hot. Any operator can accidentally spin up 2 of the same instances. They can submit a double signature. Double signing or proposing wrong votes can get certain people slashed. In short, at Puffer, we create an anti-slasher mechanism. You can think of it as a hardware wallet for validators. If your keys are generated within your, let's say, ledger, as an example, it means that you do not have access to those keys unless if you break into that hardware. By having a hardware wallet like Ledger, you're not only protecting yourself from hackers, but also you're protecting yourself, from the, kind of shooting yourself in the foot, right? And we wanted to build that for at-home stakers and for everyone, so they cannot make mistakes in doing these validator operations. Because majority of the slashing is happening, slashing was created to prevent malicious actions and also other things, but a lot of those malicious actions are actually by mistake now, today on Ethereum. So we had to solve for them to reduce the risk of running a validator. Now, as an LRT, which is fully natively backed by these ETH that is sitting on Ethereum validators, you have to now think, okay, we are protected on level 1. Level 1 is Ethereum staking. We have anti-slashers. Now you have to think beyond that. Now you're about to delegate this security to certain AVSs. Of course, in the point of view of AVSs, they want the asset that has been delegated to them as secure as possible. It shouldn't be slashable. It should be pegged, so users, if they use it in a DeFi platform, they're not under pressure of like liquidations, or even like it should have like enough liquidity so it doesn't put a lot of pressure for users to want their assets back. Now, AVSs themselves, on the point of view of stakers, have slashing rules. The key management on those AVSs have to be done well, and it has to be done in that hardware wallet manner again. That's where we're working on that level 2 to protect against AVS level slashing. So these multi-level slashing are all risks. If you almost eliminate these risks on every level, then it creates a certain level of comfort for the user, for the AVSs to actually participate. That's where our motivation on creating anti-slashers at Puffer began.
Yeah, funny that every time I hear about LRT, the second thing that comes to mind is people love to talk about slashing. It's really not that big of a deal, my personal take, because I think historically there's only been about 200 slashing events in the entire history of Ethereum. That's less than 0.1%, and that is a chain where you have slashing to prevent double spending. It's a Nakamoto chain. Most of the AVSs are not Nakamoto chains. Payments are not being transacted on those chains. Do we actually, how can we qualify or quantify the amount of risk of slashing on AVSs?
Maybe I'll just add a side note to that. Slashing is not only by the mistake of the validators themselves. We're relying on 10 companies. 5 is doing consensus clients. Other 5 are doing execution clients. If I'm not wrong, maybe 6, 5, or some other numbers on each side. If these software packages have any inherited bugs, it means the black swan event on slashing on Ethereum can happen. The question is, how are we protecting ourselves against a certain consensus client or execution client bug? Sure, it's a little less intense on the execution layer side. If there is a bug, sure, it can be picked up, the chain keeps going. But on the consensus client bugs, which only 5 companies are working on, if there was a bug and it was pushed and it happened that, let's say, they were like actually supporting 30% of the entire Ethereum consensus layer, if that 30% gets slashed, it means all those validators would lose 32 ETH each. Effectively, a third of the network would just get deleted, get just like smoke to the air, right? That's where it becomes like such a black swan existential threat that it's like an underlying risk that is always there. It can happen next week with the next update to these consensus clients, or it can never happen in the next like 1,000 years, right? Like you have to quantify this as an existential risk. And if you solve for it, then of course, like it means we're much safer. That was our philosophy behind this as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. So it's not the frequency, but the scale of impact that such an event could have.
Correct.
Makes sense. What is, now that we're at mainnet with EigenLayer, what are some of the milestones that are exciting to you that are coming up?
For us, it's our initial alpha mainnet launch in about a month. So that's the one that we're quite excited about. And then our launch after that into our private mainnet. I think that's like one we wanted to, first it was of course this like launch that just happened for EigenLayer and EigenDA and a bunch of other AVSs. And so that's like really useful info for us. I've been in touch, like we've been in touch with a lot of other AVSs of, hey, how did your launch go? What was it like getting your operators on mainnet? All of those kinds of things. And so for us, it's now really lining up for that for our launch.
For us, actually, some exciting news are coming out next week. I would say stay tuned because we're really enabling that permissionless side of like staking on Puffer very soon. So anyone in this room can, if they have 1 ETH or 2 ETH, they can go run an Ethereum validator. And that's like really when it comes down to the combination of economic security, anti-slashers, and a protocol that can handle that. So that's our exciting upcoming milestones. And of course, always looking forward to next upgrades within EigenLayer. There is also Ethereum upgrades like I think Electra, if I'm not wrong, that has been like also thought about that are gonna enable a lot of great features in staking in general.
Okay. I think we have maybe a couple seconds left. What is one hot take or prediction that you have about restaking or the future of Ethereum?
That's a very good point. I think Ethereum is gonna get a lot faster. Like the hot take is, like everybody's shying away from sharing this, but restaking is actually going to improve Ethereum itself. So pre-confirmations are coming to Ethereum thanks to restaking. Based L2s are gonna come to Ethereum thanks to restaking. And then these are all gonna contribute to lack of liquidity fragmentation, faster transactions, and also, of course, all the other items that comes with it.
I think some of the larger projects that are already existing in this space will have to shift over to some type of kind of crypto economic security involving ETH, especially if they already are using some type of crypto economic security.
All right. Thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure. And some alpha has been dropped today. Mainnet's coming up soon, so look out for that for the future of restaking and the future of Ethereum. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Roy, Nikhil, and Amir. Everyone, can we head to the main hall? We're going to do a big photo in front of the big sign out there.